Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're tackling something that honestly sounds straight out of a sci-fi novel, but it's actually an engineering problem. We're looking at the possibility of a world beyond compulsory labor. We're going to dive into whether a truly abundant civilization could emerge if we just designed our foundational systems around persistence, coherence, and intelligent self-regulation.
Think about this for a second. What if the whole point of progress isn't to figure out how to work harder, but to simply need less struggle? It's a pretty profound shift in perspective, right? Because for centuries, human life has basically been defined by the sheer, grueling effort required just to persist. But as our grasp of systems and mechanics gets better, we really have to ask, is endless struggle a permanent rule of reality, or is it just a symptom of inefficient design?
To really wrap our heads around this, we first have to rethink how we've built things up to this point. Historically, human civilization has been constructed around scarcity and immense pressure. We've always relied on these incredibly fragile survival systems where just one bad harvest, one broken supply chain, or a disrupted energy grid literally threatens the entire structure.
But what happens if the systems around us were actually stable, resilient, and self-maintaining? A totally different future opens up. Progress, in a mechanical sense, means designing our societal infrastructure so it inherently needs less human struggle to function. It's about shifting from systems that constantly demand our intervention just to avoid collapsing to systems that naturally persist on their own. I mean, think about how much of your daily energy goes into just keeping your own life from falling apart. What if the system absorbed that stress for you?
Okay, let's bring the physics back into it. We're going to apply the General Emergence Mechanics, or GEM framework from our previous explainer directly to human infrastructure. GEM actually gives us a concrete mechanical language for understanding stability, degradation, and failure, not just in physics, but in engineered complex systems like our own society.
Let's do a quick refresher on the three axes of stable existence from the source material. First, we have depth. In physics, that's the energy barrier needed to escape a shell. Translated to society, that's our system's resilience against collapse, basically how massive of a shock our food or energy grids can take. Second is stiffness, or immediate elastic resistance. Societally, this acts as our adaptive buffering against sudden, unexpected disruptions. And third, viscosity, the characteristic recovery time. For a civilization, this is exactly our speed of recovery from breakdowns. When a crisis inevitably hits, how fast do we bounce back?
When you put all of that together, you can actually define society itself as a coherence shell. A coherent shell is simply a dynamical basin where stable things persist. For us, it's a unified persistent system. Our food, transport, housing, and energy grids all have to remain stable under perturbation to prevent survival anxiety. When those foundational systems are fragile, life is anxious. It's labor-heavy. You are constantly working just to keep the shell from fracturing. But when those systems are coherent and resilient, human freedom naturally expands. Now, we really need to distinguish mere survival from actual flourishing here. Because when I say a work-free world, I know exactly what you might be picturing. And it doesn't mean we all just sit around staring at the wall doing absolutely nothing. It's really about the stark contrast between forced labor and chosen labor. On one side, you have the repetitive, mandatory toil required just to keep the lights on and keep yourself fed. On the other side, you have meaningful work, creativity, care, learning, and exploration. A work-free world is really about eliminating that survival-based side, which allows your creative and exploratory drives to become the primary focus of your existence. It's having the profound, absolute freedom to choose how you engage your mind and body. So, ironically, a work-free future might actually be a deeply human future. By stripping away the burden of repetitive, survival-based labor, by basically letting the coherent shell handle the mechanics of our persistence, we finally get the bandwidth to become more fully human. Of course, the big question is, how do we mechanically pull this off without relying on some kind of utopian magic trick?
Well, it relies on very grounded, incredibly tangible, enabling technologies. We're talking about intelligent automation paired with self-regulating supply chains, robotics actively maintaining our physical infrastructure behind the scenes, distributed clean energy that completely bypasses those fragile centralized bottlenecks we have today, precision agriculture that yields absolute food abundance, all running alongside smart housing and health-supportive environments. Notice the focus here. This isn't Silicon Valley tech hype. These are the literal mechanical components required to build a high, persistent societal shell.
And this is exactly where it ties directly back to GEM. Step 1. Deep systems just fail less easily. Step 2. Stiff systems actively resist disruption. And step 3, systems with better recovery waste significantly less time and energy bouncing back. When our automated farms and distributed grids are built with high depth, high stiffness, and fast recovery, we essentially create a friction-free society. The mechanics of the system absorb the systemic stress so we don't have to. Think about what that does to resource distribution on a macro level. The math is fascinating. By actively minimizing system waste down to just 15% and dropping systemic friction to 25%, we end up unlocking a massive 60% abundant surplus. When you stop bleeding energy just fighting against systemic collapse, the resources and time available for actual human flourishing just explode.
Let's pivot for a second from the cold, hard mechanics to the actual human experience. What does life really feel like inside a highly stable persistence shell?
Imagine waking up, and that base level of survival anxiety is just gone. Because those foundational systems are self-maintaining, suddenly there is so much more time for family, for friendship, for learning. You have the total freedom to choose meaningful activity, rather than being forced into labor by the constant threat of starvation or losing your home. The ultimate result is a massive, society-wide reduction in burnout and systemic exhaustion. It's what it looks like when a civilization is built for flourishing, instead of operating in a state of permanent emergency.
Now, I want to be super clear here. We absolutely have to temper this visionary outlook with a grounded reality check. The mechanics of emergence do not guarantee a utopia by default.
This future is not guaranteed. Having abundance without the wisdom to manage it, that can absolutely still go horribly wrong. Good systems with high depth and high stiffness have to be engineered incredibly carefully. Technology can give us the mechanical persistence, sure, but true freedom actually requires culture, ethics, and human responsibility to maintain the integrity of that shell. It's a future we have to actively choose to build and maintain.
And that brings us to the core idea that anchors today's explainer: possibilities, not promises. The physics of general emergence mechanics prove to us that highly stable, self-recovering systems are mechanically possible. The blueprint is genuinely there. But it is a blueprint we have to have the wisdom and the discipline to actually execute responsibly.
Perhaps the real promise of progress isn't just a world where machines do everything for us. Maybe the promise is that, by building these systems, humans are finally free to become more fully human. When we purposefully design our infrastructure to carry the heavy burden of persistence, we finally unlock our own potential.
That's going to do it for today's explainer. Next time, we're going to continue this exploration by looking at AI and robots as our partners in persistence, really diving into the mechanics of how they might help us maintain this abundance. But before you go, I want you to ask yourself a question. If the struggle for daily survival was entirely removed from your life tomorrow morning, what is the very first thing you would choose to build? Keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next one.